Welcome to the Read Your Keys podcast. I am your host, Joel Lopez. If you're enjoying the content, please like, smash, squish, pulverize those like and follow buttons. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Today, my guest is Godward. You can find her on Twitter at Godward. She is a wife, mom, and an educational advocate. I think I'm going to call you Gigi for this podcast. Welcome to the show today, Gigi.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be asked.
Yeah, and loving the accent already. I had Joseph Smith. He's from down in Mississippi, and he had he has a great accent, and it was just like, you know what? I'm just gonna let you talk, man, so I can just marinate in this sweet accent. So, are you in the South, or are you like southeast of the part of the country?
I grew up in the South. That's where I was born and raised. All of my family is there. I currently, though, reside above the Mason-Dixon line in the Northeast. I've been here for about 4 years. Yeah, it's crazy. So I've been here for about a little over 4 years, but having lived my entire life in the South, I have not lost, I guess, the accent. But, I used to not understand how people didn't hear their accents. I was like, how do you not hear that you have an accent? And then you don't hear it. I don't know that I have an accent. Like, I think I sound like you, or I think I sound like the people around me, but apparently I don't. So, strange.
Do I have
an accent? You don't have an accent. You just sound like a regular person with no regional
Spanish was actually my first language because I spoke Spanish to my mom, but I spoke English to my dad, and then I went to school here, so when I go to like Mexico, they'd be like, "Oh, you speak Spanish? Funny." I'm like, sounds fine to me. I think I sound like you, but like, man, you sound funny. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, you don't know it. You can hear your own accent, so. I didn't realize that. And when I first moved here, it was a whole thing, which, people who don't know me ask about my accent all the time. And so I just kind of got, I guess, a little tired of it in the beginning. And they would be like, oh, where are you from? I'm like, Australia. I know.
Australia.
And like, I was like joking because, clearly I'm from the southern part of the United States, So that was kind of rude probably of me. But anyway.
Does that bother you or is it just like, hey, they're being genuinely curious about me, or they're trying to like form some kind of connection? So okay, unless it's like, hey, I'm in the grocery store and I'm trying to just like move along, I don't have time. Like this is a we're not at a party or something. We're trying to really get to know each other.
Right. I think it's just I think people are just genuinely curious. And just like we all are. If I heard someone, there's a guy who works the deli at my local little grocery store, and I always want, because he has an accent, and I want to ask him, like, where are you from? He sounds like maybe the English is not his first language. And I want to ask. I think people are just curious.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's fun.
I've never been one to be kind of offended by that. Because people ask me what am I? I'm like, oh, I'm Mexican. It's like, oh, I didn't think you were Mexican or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, you're just want to make conversation or something. So it's like, all right, cool. Right. I think most people's intent is
just curiosity.
Just curiosity. But some people, I think they get worked up about it. But
yeah,
I'm not the type. But yeah, I'm grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you. Yeah.
The things that you talk about, are education, which, it's a big part because I have young children, and I've seen, the state of education and what's being produced. I think there's room for improvement is I guess a easy way to put it. So what is your kind of like background in education?
So I'm actually professionally a social worker, but my social work is all contained within the school system and with advocating for education for children who might need special intervention. So if a kid has some maybe speech delay or just cognitive delay, behavioral issues, things like that. So I'm advocating for support for those children. And then also we have a lot in the city that I live. We have a huge refugee population. So a lot of people coming in with legal permanent refugee status, and they are kind of thrust into the public school system with very little support. We have like ELL service, like English language learner services. But there are just so many other supports that are needed just to make their transition good and help their educational career be successful. So I'm in that realm, but I have children of my own who obviously are school age children, and I worked as a private tutor for a long time for a family.
Mm-hmm.
And then in my old city, I became kind of this de facto educational consultant. It really just happened organically. There were quite a few families who were wanting to move out of the public school and into either private schools or co-ops or maybe Montessori, religious schools. They were just wanting to move. Homeschooling, a lot of homeschoolers, a lot of people just wanted to transition out. And somehow I became this person that people would ask about, and maybe it was because I had previously tutored a homeschool family. They thought maybe I was an expert. I don't know. But it ended up being this whole thing where I would host people in my home who were educationally curious. And I would bring curriculum, books. I would bring different things, just like Charlotte Mason or like Saxon Math or teaching textbooks. I would just bring all the curriculum items that I had or that I had used, let them peruse. We would talk. I would bring in people who were homeschooling. And in the school that I was in, that we were in Tennessee, where we lived previously, it was a very small school, a very teeny rural school. I think there were about 600 kids, K through 8th grade total. So very small. Yeah. So it was really small, maybe even less than 600. And during my time there, I think it was 13 families total moved out of the school and started homeschooling. And so I just was part of that migration into homeschooling there.
Let me ask, the town that you lived in, did you grow up in that town?
I did not. No.
Okay, so you came from somewhere else to that town, because I'm not really familiar with like small towns. Like I've lived around big cities, so I don't know what the like, I've never lived in a small town, but then it's like, oh, okay, well, we know Gigi, so like we've known her since she was a little girl, and she's an education expert, so like we're comfortable with it, as opposed to like, oh, like, hey, you are really like, you came from out somewhere else, and we kind of respect your expertise on this, and so we want to pick your brain. So I just kind of wanted to get a flavor for understanding the more of the context of like living in the small town. Because man, 800 kids, 600 or 800 kids for K through
600 like K through 8. So it's pretty small.
It's really small. So the high school probably had all of like 200 kids or something in there.
No, the high school had, so we were at a small. It was an elementary school, even though it was K through 8th grade. But the high school actually like took all the elementary schools and all the middle schools, and they all came into this one high school. So there were other elementary schools, other middle schools feeding into this high school. So I think there was maybe 1,200 students total in the school, which isn't huge.
But it was the high school for like
that area
for quite a large
part of
physical area.
Right. So when I moved from that state to the state I'm in now, I had spent a lot of time. Really, well, I'll just go back. Really, what triggered this was I was working as a substitute teacher / volunteer. So some days I would actually like paid sub work, and some days I would volunteer at the boys' school. And I worked a lot in the classrooms that had, I guess at that time it was called inclusion. So children who may have some delays or special needs or something like that, they were in like a regular classroom. And I would substitute and work a lot in the classrooms that had these children who were part of the regular classroom, but also had, special or separate needs. And I had this one family that I kind of got a little close to, and their son was just so brilliant. I mean, really one of the most brilliant children I have ever encountered, but had a lot of behavioral things that were just unique and different and really not suited, like the regular American classroom, and he were just not a good match at all. And parents were getting really frustrated and discouraged because he was so bright, but also, would like put a pair of scissors in his mouth and try to cut his tongue and things like that. Ooh, wow, yeah. So you're just different things that you don't typically see. And the school meant well, but their route was medication. They're like, we think there's really something wrong. He needs to go be evaluated. He probably needs medication, that kind of thing. And the parents just did not want to do that. So I just said to them, which is what someone said to me many years ago, which was, you do not have to be taken captive by the American public school system. That does the American public school system is not the be all end all of education. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be done this way. And so I just shared that sentiment with this family. And I said, maybe this setting is just not the best setting for him. Mm-hmm. He's so bright and he has such an interesting personality. Like, he was really a joy to be around. I said, but if you're not feeling comfortable with what the school is pushing you to do, you don't have to stay in the school. You can take your child and you can do something totally different. And I think that was the first time they ever felt the freedom to, like, oh my gosh, you're right. Mm-hmm. You don't have to stay in the school, kind of thing. And they ended up pulling him, which I thought was the best decision for them. He ended up going to a Montessori school. And I mean, it's been a few years since I've seen them or whatever, but he was doing great. Mm-hmm. Like, no medication. He was going to, I think, some like behavioral therapy type things just outside of school. But he was successful. He wasn't having on medication. He wasn't being, reprimanded or, whatever for not. They were able to just work it out separately outside of what the school was suggesting.
Because even in that classroom, right, he was probably one of, we'll say, 20 to 25 students, somewhere in there. And I mean, they always say the goal is like a reduced, size classroom. It makes sense. But yeah, like, I get that. Like, I have, a few kids, and they're all very different. They thrive in different environments, and they're coming from the same family. But I think going back to what you said, it's like the American public school system, it's not the end all be all, and you don't have to, that's I think a paradigm shift, because that was something that we kind of went through with our own children. Is from the get go, it was like, well, that's not what we want for our kids, just because we'd kind of seen. I coached high school football, so I was in a public school, and I did some substitute teaching. And it was, and I actually had the goal of being a teacher, but it was like, I wanted to make more money, so I decided not to. But I have great affection for education. I had good teachers, or I recognized when I did have a good teacher, because you kind of think about it too. It's like, okay, I probably had over 100 teachers. How many of them were really like good teachers? It's like, well, you go back to, what is it, the parental rule, probably 20% of them. It's like, okay, yeah, that's probably about right. But it doesn't have to be that way, because I think for a lot of parents, I mean, it's been this way since really like the 30s, the 40s, and so it's
So actually, compulsive schooling started in the late 1800s. There was no, like, the government says you must have an education, you must educate your child, until the late 1800s. So compulsory schooling started then. And the way that the American school system, the Industrial Revolution really had a huge impact on how we kind of standardize education. Come here, girl. Sorry, my dog's gonna fuss. So the Industrial Revolution had a major impact on how we kind of delivered education and how we thought about education. I would have parents, they would say, well, our child needs to be socialized, and that's the eternal argument for public schools, as though there are no other situations where your child can learn to interact with the world around them. And I would always say this, and this is not an original thought of mine, but it was something I read and really embraced, was, what is more realistic? Being a child around people of different ages, of different abilities, in different settings where you're learning and experiencing the world around you with different aged people and those types of things? Or is it more realistic? Or is the real world more like a classroom where you're sitting with 20 other peers of your exact same age, trapped, with four walls? Like, which is more like the real world? If you're preparing children for the real world, then locking them, I'm using locking, but putting them in a room with 20 of their peers all day long for 13 years is not the real world, at all. So thinking about education, like, what is the goal of education? And Brian Fink, who is someone on Twitter, I highly recommend everyone follow Brian. He talks about this too, and other, Jeremy Tate, Chalkboard Review, everyone from Chalkboard Review, they all talk about this. And the goal of education is to create, a moral and virtuous society. Like education is supposed to instill virtue and build up character beyond just the reading and math and science and things like that. And as a Christian, as someone who might have a Christian perspective, they're looking at every subject, everything that's taught. Does it point us to God? So, like, is history a thought? Yes. So if we're going to take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ as Christians, is history a thought? Is science a thought? Is math a thought? And how do you teach that in a way that points us back to the moral character of God? So that can't be done in a public school setting, unfortunately, because it's not a religious setting, and there's all different religions and beliefs in the system. Go ahead.
I think even from when I was in school, it's changed quite a bit. But even from back then, because I think there was, so say the public school wasn't it's a public setting, right? So they'll say separation of church and state, but everybody came in with the same values, though, I think. And when you come in with the same values, like that kind of stuff just kind of permeates whatever you do. I mean, we had prayer in school, so that still permeated the school setting. And now you have people who come in and they don't have those values, and so a lot of there's been a lot of breakdown, and I think there's a lack of trust. Like I think it's interesting that you kind of worked. I don't know what size school you're working in now, but I had went in this summer and visited somebody, and they were kind of in a smaller town setting, and they had talked about like how because I actually I homeschool my kids, and I prefer it that way. But I saw in that setting, I was like, well, I think it might work here because here's a small community. It's small. I think for the most part, people here have the shared values. But it was like, well, they would tell me like, well, if we need a substitute and he comes in, like so-and-so could come in to the class and say, an administrator can say, hey, this is the substitute. He's my neighbor. I know him. And then the kids would be like, oh, this is so-and-so's neighbor. Because when we would get substitutes, like, I'm never going to see this person again. Right. I'm going to act like I'm pretty respectful, but I could be class clown, right? Like, so it was like, I'm going to turn that up because, we're watching a movie. So all that gets cranked up because this person's they're not going to be around. There's no kind of connection to like, unless they were like cool in some way where they could like command authority. Like other than that, like, teenage boys, like we were not, and it's a big, this isn't even a big city, but it was just, big, like, you didn't know people, so it's like, what do I care? They're just babysitting us. Like we knew, they knew, but like for somebody to come in and be like, oh, this is so and so's neighbor, or someone comes in the classroom and it's like, oh, this is Dave's mom. Okay, like we're not going to be an ass to Dave's mom. So I could see like in a smaller setting, just like most things, right? And it's the smaller the setting, like the more it could kind of work. But just the more it expands out, it's just so hard. You have so many different values coming in. People don't know each other. I think it makes it super challenging. And I think that's one of my my things, because I'm a big sports guy. I want my kids to be involved in like football and whatever, wrestling's whatever, and the public school, like that atmosphere, I think is great. Like I always had great experiences with my coaches, but on the educational side, I think there's lots of opportunities, and so I think imagining the way education could be now in the future, because I want my kids to have those opportunities, but I don't know what that would look like being homeschooled. Because we went to a high school football game this past weekend. I was like, man, this is great. Like the stands were full, and like we're not. This is not. I'm not in Texas. Like, so this is not football crazy. It's not the South, but this was a full stands for like a regular game. These weren't powerhouse teams, and it's like, man, it's like this is pretty cool. But also, I don't know, the other things that kind of come with being in a big school too. It's like I don't know if I want that for my kids.
Right.
So
no, I totally understand, and I think there is a difference in. I'm trying to think how I want to say this. I think there's a difference in a small rural school where everybody knows everybody. Everybody kind of goes to church together, and
Mm-hmm.
everybody's kids are kind of in youth group, and they're kind of trick or
Mm-hmm.
treating, whatever they're doing together. And it's kind of a community that's close knit, and a lot of the teachers or staff have grown up together, and they know each other, and it's a kind of a community thing
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
than a big district
Mm-hmm.
where, like you said, no one knows anyone. No one has any like vested interest in the community. Maybe it's a transient community, and when it's so large, people get lost in the mix. And
Mm-hmm.
and I think even like in the smaller schools, I think parents do have more of a say on how things go, and teachers, and gossip. Gossip is wrong, but sometimes
Mm-hmm.
gossip has a place of like social control in
Mm-hmm.
small communities. So whenever teachers would, there was like something going on with a teacher, whatever, parents got involved, and then it was just a totally different situation than a big school district,
Mm-hmm.
where people kind of get lost in the mix. So my dog is needing. Can you give me just
Is
like
he?
2 seconds?
Yeah. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'm sorry. Okay,
Go,
okay, hold on just
go
a
ahead.
second.
The pooch okay?
You'll have to.
Is the pooch okay? I can't hear you now.
I said you'll just have to edit that out. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah, I'll take care of
Okay.
that.
Okay.
Uh,
So I think there are differences in, just going back to what we were talking about. I think there are differences in a small rural kind of community school effort, and then a really large district where
mm-hmm.
parents and teachers kind of get lost in the mix, and there's not like this community long-term vested interest in the school. So for sure.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of stood out to me, like the school I went to, it's a pretty big school. Like this like the school I went to like was pretty large. I don't know what our class was, but like they had a student section that was packed with students, and then they had like stands. Like it was a pretty big stadium, and it was
Mm-hmm.
packed. And
Mm-hmm.
for me thinking like, if I'm not like super popular, uh, jock or whatever, or whatever nerd currency, or I was talking to Miranda. She's a therapist, and she said that social media is big now. So the kids who are big on social media, they get, they're the popular kids,
Mm-hmm.
not the athletes.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like the bottom part of the maybe the troublemakers. So they make friends or whatever because they're the troublemakers, right? Because that's I think that's kind of how it goes. But then you have like this really large middle, like
Mm-hmm.
where do they find their place at? And I was kind of like watching the teens, and it's like I don't know if they have to like peacock more to like get
Mm-hmm.
attention, or to do these things to get attention. But it was just like, man, this is such a big school. Like I can understand
Mm-hmm.
why kids are anxious, because it's like, well, I don't really have a place in this large school. Like
Mm-hmm.
nobody, you're being shuffled from class to class. I'm one of 40 or 30 kids in each class, which is I think kind of standard. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
this at the schools that you're at in the high schools, if
Mm-hmm.
30 or 40 kids in a classroom. That's just hard to find your place. And then the schools now are massive. Like the buildings are really nice. Over here anyway, they're building new schools. They're nice buildings. Like, hey, look at this auditorium. Look at this
Mm-hmm.
gym. It's really nice. But it's like, man, but like you're passing through thousands of kids here,
Mm-hmm.
and how do you make a connection in just this massive setting? Or and then in the rural setting, I think maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's not as bad, because like, hey, I'm not connected here so much at the school, but I have the youth group that I go to, or
Mm-hmm.
Johnny across the way,
Mm-hmm.
so you still feel like you have a place.
Right.
Whereas in the bigger settings, it's like I can see how kids get lost, and I can see why they're anxious, and I can see why they're turning to like social media and stuff to try and
Mm-hmm.
find that place. Because one of
Right.
the things I read, this was like maybe like 10 years ago, was like, oh, kids aren't going to prom now, or the homecoming dances, and I was like, what?
It's like a rite of
Like
passage.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't go to the dance guy, but like when you're a senior, it's like okay, you go because it's like hey, this is your life, so you
Mhm.
do those things like you
Mhm.
try to talk to girls and do that stuff, but now it's like they're on their phones, and it's like well that can't be good for kids, and so you having boys and they're in high school, junior high
Mhm.
age,
Mhm. Mhm.
how has that been with you kind of having this almost yeah you have a different view because you've kind of been involved in it in different areas. How is that seeing your own children in school?
Well, I think that both of them are involved in different activities, sports or clubs or things like that. So they have little groups that they can have group cohesion with and feel like
Mm-hmm.
they're part of something. And they're boys, and I just don't think boys are quite as into social media as girls are. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think they both have Instagrams, but they never post, and they're just really not ever on or anything like that. And they don't have Facebook, and they don't have a Twitter, so they don't have really any social media that they're interacting with. I think somehow they've still, somehow we've still been able to preserve their desire to be with their friends and be in groups and be doing activities and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I know many people who I, I don't want to say it's like a girl thing, but I do have more friends who have girls who seem to be a little bit more withdrawn, like and more with the social media and that kind of thing than my friends with boys. And I don't know. I haven't done a study. I haven't read the literature on it, so I don't know if
No,
that's more
yeah.
common. But I can say for my boys, they typically are just not as into the social media stuff on their
I
phones a
just
lot.
maybe thinking the difference between boys and girls. Like boys actually like being in like with large groups of other boys because there's the ball busting, the jokes that kind of come along with it that you can't really do on social media. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. I mean, I've never been a girl, but like you normally see like large groups of girls. It's like I don't really know if they really like each other. They just kind of might be going somewhere
Right,
because it's like oh we're all kind of going this way, and you
right.
kind of might kind of tolerate each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know. Like
I
that
think
was my experience, but like usually it was like the girls liked being around the boys because we were the fun ones. So it was like they'd kind of like be around because it's like oh like these guys are funny or whatever. So like we
mm-hmm.
they make it fun,
Yeah,
but like they wouldn't really do the same things with themselves.
yeah,
So because I don't know what girls talking about. So
yeah. No, and I think too, like this last year, and I'm gonna will not use the c word.
the
We
Rona,
all the Rona, yeah.
that's what I call it, the
But
Rona.
yeah, the Rona. We it really did disrupt kind of like the routine of teenagers and kind of what they do. I mean, they didn't get to have dances for a year. They didn't get to have
Mm-hmm.
sports for a year. They didn't get to have all these things that kind of bring them together. So they're kind of like doing this re-entry now back into those types of social events and those types of sports and clubs. They just my boys' school recently just had a homecoming dance.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have it, obviously last year,
Yeah.
and they had it outside on the football field. And the football players, rather than participating in the dance, ended up running plays on the football field, which was hilarious. They didn't
Yeah.
even like participate in the dancing.
Yeah.
They ran
Yeah.
drills and stuff,
Uh-huh.
like in their suits and sports jackets
Yeah.
and stuff
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it was a good like social event and a good like kind of re-entry back. So I'm hoping that things like this come back, and I'm hoping that this year that we've all kind of been looking at a computer screen, looking at a phone screen, more than we would like to admit. I'm hoping that as things like this start to kind of come back in, that kids will be more inclined to be um, with groups and people and friends and less.
Did you see that the I mean the football players they're kind of their own group, but the other kids were they pretty happy and enthusiastic to be having the opportunity because I mean it's one thing like to have the homecoming dance and be like oh yeah that's lame, but then when it gets taken away from you it's like oh like this sucks.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
now that you have the opportunity to go and do it again, that there was kind of a renewed enthusiasm for
Getting
just
dressed up.
yeah getting dressed up
Yeah.
and doing having an event with your friends.
Right. Right. No, I think there was. I think I was actually looking at something the other day, and it was showing clips from like a like a early 1960s dance or something, and everybody knew all the dances, and everybody was participating in like actual dances, whatever. And now, kids just kind of stand around with their arms crossed and they act like they're too cool to participate. So I don't know what's affecting, I'm sure there's some kind of explanation for why things used to be this way, and now they're just kids standing around with their arms crossed and not really participating, but they want to be there.
Yeah.
They just don't want to act like they want to be there. Yeah, it's very strange.
I think we're seeing similar age. Did you dance in high school?
We did dance.
Yeah.
But we didn't have like, yeah, we danced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We danced, but it was not appropriate dance.
No, it was not. Ours was not inappropriate. I don't remember it being.
Ours was inappropriate.
It was inappropriate. Oh,
it was inappropriate.
I don't remember ours being.
Well, we kind of did, but like we did, like you said, like there was actual dances like in the '60s where it was like, oh, like this is nice and wholesome. Like ours, we kind of like did the nice and wholesome stuff, but then it was like. Once you heard this is for the 99 to the 2000, so it changed. You know what I mean? It was like, oh, okay, like you don't want your mom seeing.
I'm trying to think some of that.
Like
I'm trying to think who was like a hip hop person in the late 90s, early 2000s. I'm trying to think of like what some of that music might have been. Nelly.
Yeah, Nelly was big.
Yeah.
Cash Money was big. That's the 99 for the 2000s.
Yeah.
And in the South, I'm sure you got a lot of that. So like
Ludacris and Ja Rule and all that.
So when you heard that, like you went to the floor and his booty shaking, so like they talk about stuff now. It's like, well, we weren't dancing the most wholesome 20 years ago.
I don't remember. I grew up in like rural Appalachia, and so we were kind of like behind the times on everything, which was actually great, and it was wonderful. And so that had like not really reached our school or our culture at all. So it was still, even when I went to prom in 99, 2000, whenever it was, 98, 99, I can't remember. It was still pretty wholesome. Like, I don't remember it being anything inappropriate. And I think, we had like the electric slide, and we had, things like, we were still doing that stuff. So it was pretty tame. I can't say that I participated in anything that was.
Oh, okay.
But I know about the music, and I know about, the things that you're saying. We just didn't really like experience it because we were.
No. I'm from Southern California.
So we were in a little mountain town in Georgia. So it was like. In the like literally like in the boonies, so that had not like reached us yet. We were just so sheltered and just didn't know anything. We had a guy that came and played bagpipes. I mean,
really?
Yeah, it was crazy. So we didn't have any of that, but I know what you're talking about. Yeah, but now I just like the kids like stand around, like they want to be there, but they don't want to act like they're there. So just very different, just cultural shifts across the board, and like. How is education playing a part in that cultural shift that we've seen? I just wanted to go back to something I said a minute ago about like education, like being a moral issue, like, and some of the things I said, I didn't want to like act like I had said them on my own. These are people that I've read. I'm just sharing thoughts of I'm not sharing original thoughts a lot of the times. I'm sharing things that I've read from other authors. So I just wanted to say that.
I mean, I don't think my thoughts are. I know somewhere around the line I picked something up and just I say it in my own words. So I don't think you need to really say that but I think you saying them though is great because it's like, well, I'd never heard some of those things. But one of the things that we had mentioned about like the Industrial Revolution and like what is the goal of education. Like one of the things that I see and I kind of cringe when I see it's like the public school around here, like say the mission statement of the school is college and career ready. And it's like, what a low goal for education. It's just like, oh, so you can go to college and you can get a job. Like that's the point. That is the point of our education. It's like such a low, I don't know. And when I was
like reducing education, like reducing it to career readidness.
Yeah.
And so that's all education is supposed to be. Yeah.
Yeah, that was that never set well with me. And then I saw somebody tweet something yesterday. It was like scantrons are a scam or multiple choice tests are a scam, and it's like, oh yeah, like I was very good at taking multiple choice tests, right? Like that's what you kind of learned how to do, and then you get out in life, it's like this is not like this at all. It's not like I can eliminate like 2 wrong answers for sure, and then maybe like get into the right. It's like, it's not like this. It's not like this at all. And so I think, it makes it easier for teachers to grade papers, right? But are the students really learning? And so,
Right.
Well, I don't know.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. No,
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say. Well, I was just going to say. So what I'm seeing now, presently, is even different than what I saw, like, 5 or 10 years ago when I kind of first started. Well, I've been exploring non-traditional education for 18 years since my first child was born. But really, in the last like 10 to 12 years, I've really focused on education, advocacy, and helping parents to make decisions that are best for their children and that, I guess, maximize their educational experience. So what I'm seeing now that I'm so frustrated by, a couple of things. Kind of ignoring the regression that happened during 2020, 2021, when children were doing Zoom lessons and they were not going to class. It is startling, the regression. I have children who it's almost as if they've never even been to school before. They lost so much. I mean, they lost so much.
Yeah.
And my children who are in dual language families, so maybe mom and dad do not speak English and they might speak, lots of different languages. I have children from many different countries. When parents who don't have any education of their own, don't speak English, cannot support their child, and they were at home with a Zoom with parents who can't speak English for a year, it is just quite the disaster right now. And I can't speak for every school, but I can say in my district, it's alarming. So I don't know when these children will ever catch up. I'm sure there will be a time that maybe there is some pickup. But the other thing that is a big focus now is social emotional learning. So social emotional learning is identifying your emotions and sorting through those and thinking about good choices and bad choices and how you're going to respond if you're in a situation that maybe is not good. And just a lot about emotions, which is great because there are a lot of children who do not have anyone in their lives outside of school who really is teaching them right from wrong and helping them make good choices and helping them to cope with, angry feelings or despairing feelings or whatever. They don't have anyone that's helping them identify those and work through them in a way that is good and helpful. They don't have that. So there is a time for us to instruct and build a character and teach coping and things like that. And I've tweeted about this and I've talked about it with different people, but there's just this unmooring. There's just this detachment from the larger moral, I don't know what word you want to use, but there's just framework. This framework. There's just this there's this detachment from the moral framework. So I can tell a child, you need to make good choices. Well, how does that child know that's a good choice? And then why should they be good? Why should they make those choices? Why should they do anything? Why should they stop themselves from making poor choices? And if you've detached it from moral framework and you're just expecting like behavior modification, I just don't think it goes anywhere good, and I don't think anything sticks.
Well, there's no guiding principle, right? Let's I know I get the answer right in this specific instance, but then in the next instance, I don't have a framework to make the proper decision. Like I might have learned it for that specific situation, but I can't move it forward into the next one. I think
there's no guiding principle. That's a good way to say it.
I think you had tweeted that like you were helping a little boy who had gotten in trouble and for drawing pictures or something like that.
Yeah, he drew 2 girls in a coffin.
Yeah. But in going through the tweet and speaking to him, he was kind of able to kind of come up on his own, like, oh, this is the way I should have handled it. Because it's like, he had this internal thing, but it's like that thing, that internal, we'll say spirit, conscience,
voice or spirit, right.
Yeah, that gets ignored because like, oh, we just want you to get the right answer, right? Because I guess that's really what education has come down to. It's like we want you to get the right answer. Getting the wrong answer is making mistakes is bad. Get it right. And I think part of that is because there is no guiding framework. We've removed that,
right.
you know, explicitly from the school, but also culturally too. Like I think there was like a football coach in Washington. Like he would pray with his kids, and it was like you can't do that. Like I worked with inner city kids. They need that stuff. Like they would come to me and be like, hey, like, you know, hey coach, can you pray for me? Yeah, come here. You know, they need that. They need that stuff. But that stuff is that it's disregarded, and it's just like you know, I'm all for education. You know, these kids need to learn how to read, write, all that stuff. But they need that influence, and they're not getting it.
Right.
They're getting the opposite.
Yeah. And I tweeted about this too, and I'm not trying to just like rehash my tweets and talk about them, but just I think it pertains to what we're talking about. So we have this huge focus on social emotional learning, which there is a place for that because these children, a lot of them don't have anything in their lives pointing them in a right direction. There's no modeling of virtue. So there is a time and a place for that. But again, we need that principle. It needs to be tied to a moral principle, which I really like that you said that. But
I actually took because like I said, I was going to be a teacher, and I was actually going back to move into it, and I went to a master's in education program for a little bit, and one of the scariest things that I learned in there was like this motto of in loco parentis, in place of the parent, and seeing what these people who were already working in schools were like, oh yeah, like we know more than the parents do. I'm like, what are you talking about? Because I have kids. I was like, there's no way that someone else is going to make decisions for me, for my children. And that was a very much prevailing thought. And if you have that prevailing thought of like, hey, we're in place of the parent, not attached to any kind of moral framework or a moral framework that I'm opposed to, like that is not gonna work. And I think when we think about like, you know, building the emotional stuff, it's like, well, that's kind of like, that's not all kids. It's like, well, it's not really the school's place to. Well, I guess it goes back to like, okay, like you know, we want to have a moral framework, but if it's not that moral framework, it's not really going to work. I don't know. I'm just kind of like talking.
No. I think that's all great, and you're right that they do have this position of we know more and we know better for the child than parents do. And I've talked about this before. I think there's this whole generation of parents that have believed that it is the government's responsibility to teach their children everything. And you know, there are so many children who come to school, you know, at young ages, not knowing one letter and not knowing one shape or one color or one number or how to count or anything like that. And parents believe that that's what happens when they go to school. They don't see any, and I'm not blaming the parents, but they've been sold this lie that it is the government's responsibility, it is the school's responsibility to teach their children. And so they just think, okay, well, that's something that the school can do. I can't do that as a parent. I don't have the skills. I don't have the education. I don't have, you know, whatever. And they believed that they need some special skill or special training to teach, like, this is how you write your name, and this is a shape, and this is a color blue. You know, they think they need training for that, and they don't.
Well, I wouldn't blame the parents because they have bought the goods, but it is their responsibility to not to. It is my job as a parent to be like, oh, that is not a good idea, or this train of thought is not good. My kids need this opportunity to, you know, even if I was going to put them in school to have, you know, give them a start to it. But I really much identify with that, like the not feeling qualified, right? Because everything now is like, oh, you got to be qualified or expert or some kind of something to do a certain thing, when it's like you said, before the 1800s, like, you know, everybody was doing this on their own. Who
taught Benjamin Franklin? Who taught Thomas Jefferson? Who taught them?
I had
You
that
know.
same thought. It's like, what public school? I had this exact thought yesterday. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
what public school did Benjamin Franklin go to?
Yeah,
Like
right,
I
right,
had that exact thought. That's funny that
right.
you mentioned that. That's why it's fun to do this, because I talk to people and it's like I have
Yeah,
these thoughts in my head. It's like
yeah,
you
yeah.
said the thing that I was thinking. Like this is so
Right.
fun.
And I can't remember if it was Henry Ford or Thomas Edison. I honestly can't remember, but I remember it was one of the two. Um, there, I want to say it was Edison. But he had gone to a school, and his teacher basically told his mom that his brain was like scrambled eggs.
Mm-hmm.
That he was just not the typical student. He could not stay focused. He could not. He couldn't focus. He just was not like the other children, and
Mm-hmm.
basically, it's hopeless.
Mm-hmm.
And mom decided to homeschool him, and she set up this whole like laboratory in the basement, and set up this whole like homeschooling situation for him. And obviously, he was quite bright and able to achieve all the things he did outside of what his school had
What do you think about
expected
this,
him.
Gigi? Because he's exceptional, right? So his mom must have been exceptional.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing with public school is that, hey, we're able to take, a large sample or quantity of kids.
Mm-hmm.
What if we were to do that across the board? Like, take a public school, elementary school, and be like, okay, now we're homeschooling.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the outcomes? I mean, this is a thought experiment. There's no studies. I'm not studies guy either.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just thinking through, guy. Like, is the country better, or even just educational outcomes better if you just say it took like 3 kindergarten classes and said, okay, you guys are all being homeschooled as opposed to being in school for like 2 or 3 years?
Do I think it's better? Do I think they would fare better?
Yeah. Do you think that would be a better? Because the thing with public schools, right? It's just like, hey, like, okay, we kind of know what kind of happens.
Mm-hmm.
Benjamin could we end up with more Benjamin Franklins? Like that's really like
Mm-hmm.
the goal, because I don't really know.
There are so many factors. I'm thinking of, because like I'm thinking about the school that I'm in now. If we did this experiment with the community and the school that I'm with now,
Mm-hmm.
I think the children would be probably worse off, because many of my children have parents who are pretty negligent,
Mm-hmm.
and they would just keep them at home, and they would continue to not learn,
Yeah.
and nothing would happen. I think if you took those kids and you put them with, and they were from families with stability, and parents who, even if they just like had the bare minimum, degree of care and motivation to teach,
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely those children would fare better than
Yeah.
the public school.
Yeah.
But again, I really think it depends on the parents.
Yeah.
I have many children who public school really is the best option for them.
Yeah.
There's just, obviously I'm a huge advocate of school choice, and I think private schools often do much better than public schools, but they need to be in a classroom and not in their home, unfortunately. I wish those parents had the ability, had the motivation, had the desire. I do wish that. But there are many who don't. And they've believed that it really is not their responsibility to teach. They've believed the lie that it's someone else's.
Yeah, I guess in that instance, the way it would work is that you'd have to have parents who were kind of willing and on board to be able to do something like that. But I guess that's kind of like, when you had, those families that were coming to you in your home and wanting to, like, those are the types of people.
Those are going to be successful.
They're going to work. But for the kid who came into school not knowing, a letter or a shape, like that's not gonna end well. And I guess and
I think that the 1 year of being at home and Zooming is a clear indication that those parents don't have the capacity to effectively have their children schooling from home.
Well, I think even too, if you go back to the 1800s, right, the world was different. Parents were working around the home, so the kids would probably help out around the farm or just do tasks with their father and mother, and so that that is a different type of education. Where now it's like well, mom and dad go off to the office,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm.
so that's what they're doing. So you're gonna take mom out of the office, or to homeschool.
Right.
I don't know if she'd rather be at the office than
Right.
homeschooling.
Yeah.
It's not. It's
Right.
not. It's not.
Right.
It's not easy. I hear my wife. With the kids, it's not. It's not. It's not easy.
No, 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 no. It's a huge thing. And whenever I would work with families who were transitioning from the like public school to homeschooling, I was like, the first year is going to be really hard. Like
Hmm.
it's going to be real
It
hard.
was, yeah.
Yeah, the first year is so hard, and sometimes the second year is hard. And it really does take time to get into a groove, to pick curriculum, to get into routine, to kind of see what this kid needs and what that kid needs. It just takes time to kind of iron out the kinks.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we're just kind of this instant gratification culture, and whenever something doesn't work immediately, we just want to toss it out and be like, okay, what's that work? And really, with homeschooling, especially if you're transitioning from like a public school to homeschooling, you just got to be real patient and keep your expectations real
Yeah.
low for the
Yeah.
first year. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's really important. Do you remember that movie? This is like in maybe the early 90s. It's called Stand and Deliver. It was a math teacher
Mm-mm.
in like East LA,
Mm.
and so he in the movie he like, this is a true story. So he takes these kids in East LA. They speak Spanish or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then like he gets them to like calculus or something like that. Like, and it's like, well, like these would be considered kids who aren't very smart, could barely do algebra. And he got them to like
Mm-hmm.
calculus or some really high level
Mm-hmm.
of math. And they kind of went on and like they'd rock their SATs. And it was like,
Mm-hmm.
we can't believe these kids from East LA can do this well. So in the course of the movie, like this happens over a year. And so it was like, this kind of became the expectation, or, like in your mind, it's like, oh, like you said, the instant gratification. But it was like,
Yeah.
no, this guy in real life had started with these kids back when they were
Mm-hmm.
like in 6th grade, and like
Mm-hmm.
had like after school clubs, and he
Mm-hmm.
was like,
Mm-hmm.
he had been working with them for years before they got up
Mm-hmm.
to that point. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's the same thing with like homeschooling. Like for us, it was, we had our kids in a charter school, but then it was, hey, are we going to be on Zoom? Are we going to be what's the classroom environment going to look like? There's too many variables in here, so we'll
Mm-hmm.
just eliminate that, and we're gonna bring them home, which we
Mm-hmm.
had been thinking about anyway. So like we kind of had
Mm-hmm.
that. This was kind of like our push, like, oh, let's try the experiment, because,
Mm-hmm.
but it is a lot of that though, of
Mm-hmm.
like, which curriculum are we going to use? This curriculum,
Right.
like we thought that we had the great reviews and stuff, isn't really that good. This doesn't really fit for this kid.
Right.
And then on top of that, we have younger kids in the house and trying to manage
Yeah.
that whole thing. So
Mm-hmm.
it is a lot.
Yeah.
And so
It's a huge responsibility.
hmm
It's so huge. I mean, your child's education, and you want to
hmm
think that you are able and you're providing, really high quality education. I get it.
yeah.
So what you said something about earlier about the Pareto distribution, like if you're thinking about all the parents in the country,
hmm
I think it is an 80-20 split. I think 80% for sure. If they chose to adapt and adjust their lives and homeschool their children, no, they'll be great.
hmm
No issue. But there are 20% that I'm like, it's probably not gonna be good.
hmm
And it's just the way it is. It's just the way it is. And I wish that every parent had the ability or the circumstances to do it. Truly, I just think unfortunately there are parents who are in situations that just don't allow for successful schooling at home.
Yeah.
And maybe where they are now, they can't, but maybe in 5 years they would be able to do that. But I do think, unfortunately, there are some that would be detrimental to them.
hmm
Just because I work in the social work side of things, and
Yeah.
I see,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you're in an exceptional place, seeing the exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is taken. It's like, yeah, it would not end well, if the home life isn't stable. One of the things I did want to ask you about is like having older kids, because like to me, one of the things, like you say, like, oh, what would you tell yourself when you were younger or whatever? Like I would have told myself to have kids younger. Like it's really hard. I have quite a few kids, but it's like, man, like I wish I would have started sooner. And I feel like you got that experience. Would you feel? I mean, that's kind of not a fair question, because like these are kids. But how cool has it been to have like because your boys are like almost been now, right? So.
Well, I mean, I've got one that's an adult, like technically
yeah.
an adult. So.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's like the greatest thing ever. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I'm not gonna pretend like, oh, you know, it has its ups and downs. I mean, because I had my first when I was 21,
Uh-huh.
and I literally had not a clue what I was doing. I mean, I know there are people out there like, oh, it's maternal instinct. It just kicks in, and you just know what to. And that is true in many ways, truly. But there were many things I just didn't know, and there are things certainly I would do differently. But I was like very new 21-year-old having a baby, and I was 24 when I had my second one, and I just, in those early years, there are things that I wish I had done differently just because I was young and just didn't know. But being almost 40 and having an adult child, and knowing that my early 40s are going to be like sending them kind of out into the world, even if they, you know, stay around nearby, they're both planning on going to college. My oldest just applied to like 5 schools. So, you know, they are going to college. They are pursuing things that they want to do. They want, you know, they know what they want in their future. To be at that stage and be the age I am is the greatest thing. It's so great. I'm not gonna lie. It's so great. I'm like, I'm 40, and this, you know, I've done it. Like, you know, and certainly there are things that could arise in the next few years. I've still got one that's going on 16, and there are things that could happen, certainly. But so far, it's been really great, and they're good boys, and it's really a thrill to be my age and to have grown kids. Yeah, I love it. I really do love it. Yes. And people would be like, I remember whenever I was having babies when my friends were, you know, in college at sorority parties. And I remember a lot of people being like, you're going to regret not having those years. You know, you're going to regret that kind of thing. And I have never regretted it one day. Like, not for a minute have I regretted it, because I'm like, those years are so fleeting. They go by like that. And you're like possibly making some really horrible life choices during those years. And I'm not putting myself, I mean, I made plenty of really horrible decisions, but, you know, during those years I was raising kids and kind of avoiding maybe some of those.
Yeah. Those unsavory.
Right. Those circumstances. You know, I think I was protected a lot from a lot of those things. And I don't feel like I missed out on anything. I don't feel that at all.
Well, it's like, oh, you can travel. It's like, well, I can travel with my kids. Like,
right. I can travel when I'm 40. Yeah, right. I mean, because now I'm in a position, I'm not sure.
Where you actually have money.
Where you have money, you have, and you don't, it's just a totally different, and you think about the world differently. You think about yourself differently. You are wiser. I mean, you just are. And so being able to be my age and where I am in my season of life with parenting, I really, really love it. And people are like, oh, turning 40, it's the new 30. And I'm like, no, I don't want to be the new 30. Like, I really like where I am at 40. Like, I'm really happy with the decisions that I've made. Yeah. Well, that sounds like I'm being like braggadocious or whatever. I'm not. I want to encourage like younger girls, like, do the thing.
That's what they
get
used to
married, have the babies. You know.
That used to be the natural progression at that time, right? And then it got extended because they would be in college, right? So they would go to college, and then they would, you know, now you need to make college worth it, so you got to go get a job, and so now you're pushing that timeline farther back when the natural time. What if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when you got married?
I was 19.
Okay, so you guys high school sweethearts right at the gate?
No, he's older than I am. He's 7 years older.
Oh, okay. So, but you met him like right around high school time, kind of thing.
Yeah, right at my senior year.
Okay, yeah, because I got married at 23, but we waited, and then that's why I'm like, oh man,
should have had kids at 23.
I could have, and that's why I was like, oh man. You know, but you always listen, think like
whatever happens is meant to be. I'm a firm believer in like it's just the way it is.
Well, because I think too, like my grandfather passed away like 3 years ago, and I was like, man, like I took my kids to see my grandpa. Like he got to meet his great grandchildren, and plus my cousins had children, but it was like every time I had a kid, I was like, I'm gonna go see my grandpa. And, you know, cause he was the last living one. And I was like, how cool is that he got to see, you know, his grandkids get married and he got to meet great grandchildren. Like for me, it was like, oh, I'd like to meet my great grandchildren and like to see my grandkids like be at their weddings, because you know we had our grandparents at our weddings, and I can see like, you know, people now are delaying this stuff. It's like, well, yeah, you're delaying it so you can, you know, go and travel and stuff, but then like, you know, your grandparents might not have the opportunity to see you get married, or
Right.
you know, whatever, just because you're not extending that out. So it's, I don't know, it might be a small thing, but it's like, oh, it's something that I've kind of like thought about, because once you have kids right now, you start thinking like, oh, like, you know, I want my kids to have, you know, lots of kids. And
Right,
then,
right.
you know, like I want to have lots of grandkids. Like,
Yeah,
I
right,
wanna
right, right.
you know, like I think, you know, you know, it might seem strange, but that's kind of always how I was. I was talking, I think I was talking to Reeves yesterday. It's like, all I really wanted to do was be a good husband and a good dad. And then it's like that, now it's like the extension of that. It's like, oh, like, well, what does that look like?
I want a legacy. I want,
yeah.
I get it.
And so that's kind of where that came for me. And that's why I thought it was really cool that, you know, you had kids young, and, you know, we're basically the same age, but it was like, you know, people were doing different things. And I very much saw that. And it was strange too, because I got married young and my friends were out partying. It's like, hey, you want to go to the club? It's like, no, I don't, because there's nothing for me to do there. Like I already have like the thing that you're going for the club for.
Right.
I'm gonna get that tonight, and I don't have to worry about like if she gets pregnant. Like that's also kind of awesome,
Right.
you know. It's like it's not a oh man, guess what happened? It's like, you know, it's like, oh yeah, like this is what's supposed to happen.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, I totally understand, and I think that I want people to get married young and have children young. I do want that, and there are situations. If people are young, I do think it's important to get feedback from those around you. If you're, you know, go to church, get, you know, counseling from your pastor. Have people who are, you know, older married couples maybe come into your life, be mentors, that kind of thing. I think it's really important if you do get married young to have that. I think young people going into marriage with none of that support system or none of that wisdom and guidance and that kind of thing, it's not a good situation, because you are growing and changing a lot in those years. I mean, I changed so much from 19 to 25 and from 25 to 35, 40. Like, I don't feel like I'm even the same person. So there's a lot of changing and growth that occurs in those years, and just making sure you have a support system and people who are speaking into your life and, you know, just giving you feedback or mentoring you, that kind of thing, I think is really important if you do go the route of young married children.
I think people talk about like personal growth on Twitter and things for personal growth. Like to me, getting married was one of the things that really kind of accelerated that for me. But it really wasn't until I had kids that it even accelerated it even more. Because, you know, being married and without kids, you know, we had our arguments and stuff like that. Obviously, because, you know, we were. But it was like once we had kids, it was like now like the direction changed from like, okay, from us to like, okay, now the kids, and, you know, then you really learn, like, you know, you learn to not be selfish in a marriage, but then once you have kids, it's like you really learn to like, oh man, like all this time, like and then you actually find like that you wasted a lot of time. Like when you're young, you'd be like, oh, I don't have any time. It's like, dude, you have all the time in the world. You get all the sleep. You have all the sleep. Like, you know, you have a sick kid and, you know, you wake up 4 times a night. And, you know, and then my wife was actually the one that did the more. I would just wake up because I would hear the baby, but she would be the one that was getting up. Like it's just a new appreciation for like that, having the children from my perspective as a man lets you know whether you made the right choice when you got married. Because like when you're not, when the kids aren't there, it's like, hey, you know, the cool sex and, you know, the traveling and all this stuff, like that's all good. But once you have kids, like, oh, the crap just hit the fan, and now I realize, did I make the right decision? And then some people are like, dang, man. And other people are like, whoo, yeah, I made the right decision.
Right. Well, I so appreciated this time together. I know you've got stuff to do. I've got a call that I've got to take care of in a few minutes, but this was so great. I'm so glad we got to like sit and discuss, and I hope that I was able to give you
No, this
information
is
that was
great. I
useful
really appreciate
that
you
your
coming
audience
on, Gigi.
And
So
you had
this
like
is,
a really good lineup this week of people I think you were interviewing. And
yeah,
meeting
this is the
with.
first time I've done it. So I was like, I'm going to try and knock it out because I'm going to get pretty busy here soon. So I was
Yeah,
like, all right,
perfect.
like let me line this up. So this is
Yeah.
Going Godward. You can find her on Twitter at Going Godward. She's a wife and a mom and an educational advocate. Gigi, thanks so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Joel. It's my very pleasure.
All right, take care.
Okay, thank you.
Bye.